Hey guys, Alex from LMU Academy here with another Le Mans Ultimate Fix Setup Lap Guide, this time in the BMW M HYBRID at Le Mans. As always, we'll cover the setup first, then cover each corner in slow time, followed by the pit entry, and then finally put the lap together for you in real time. So first, let's take a look at the setup, and remember that we're using the default setup for the car with some slight changes to the electronics and brakes, which means you can still use this setup and achieve this lap time in any race that forces the fixed setup to be used. Now we set a lap time of a 3:24.8 using quali fuel with the medium tyre compound. Taking a look at the traction settings, we're using an overall TC value of 7, TC cut 6 and TC slip 10. Onto the brakes, and we're using a brake bias of 54.6 on the front and 45.4 on the rear. We're using a brake migration of 2.5% to the front, as well as a max pedal force of 100%. Then finally onto the anti-roll bars, and we've got the front set to P3 and the rear set to P1. Now that's covered, let's take a look at each corner in slow time. So approaching turn 1, we move our car as far across to the left of the track as possible so that the blue and yellow curb is roughly in line with the middle of our car. Now you'll see two white lines here, and our turn-in point is roughly in between those two white lines. Once we've turned in, you'll see a bend in the curb, and our braking point is just after that bend as the track straightens out again. Now this is a very easy spot to lock up our tyres, and the trick to avoiding a lockup here is to get our wheel as straight as possible before hitting the brakes. Then we go hard on the brakes and downshift as fast as we can from 6th down to 2nd gear. As we turn in, we want to place our left side tyre slightly on the edge of the yellow sausage curb, as any more than this will unsettle the car. Be sure not to touch the white and red flag here because that'll invalidate the lap. As we reach the apex, we use a little bit of throttle and then start turning our wheel over to the right in order to line up for the next apex. Then as we approach the next apex, we lift off the throttle slightly in order to rotate the car more. The same method applies here, and we aim to place our right side tyres on the edge of the yellow sausage curb. Now once we make contact with the apex, we gradually go back on the throttle and try to get the wheel straight again. It's important to be smooth with the throttle here because there's a high chance of losing the rear of the car. As we exit the corner, we place the left side wheels on the blue and yellow curb to open up our exit. As we approach the next set of corners, we start again by placing our car as far to the left as possible, so that the blue and yellow curb is in line with the middle of the car, and this will allow us to enter the next corner without turning the wheel too much. Now our next braking point is just after we pass the final red and white flag here, as we get the wheel straight again. We go down into 3rd gear and trail brake up to the apex. Again, we place our left side tyre just on the edge of the blue and yellow curb, any more than this will unsettle the car. As we meet the apex of the corner, we then go back on throttle gradually and get the wheel straight as soon as possible. Now this next corner is flat out, and we can open it up more by placing our right side wheel directly on the blue and yellow curb as we reach the apex. As we exit this corner, there's a slight downhill slope. Now if you're not careful with the steering wheel, there's a chance that the car can oversteer to the right as you reach that slope. So be sure to get the wheel as straight as possible before you reach it. Now for the Tetra Rouge corner, we place our left tyre on the blue and yellow curb, and the braking point here is hard to identify. Now we can use this part of the blue and yellow curb that's noticeably dirtier, or we can use this section of the railing that is noticeably darker. We only very lightly tap on the brakes around 20%, and once we do, we need to keep the car in 5th gear and really throw the car into the turn, and we're aiming to place our right side tyres on the blue and yellow curb, but avoid the yellow sausage curbs because they'll cause the car to understeer out too wide on the exit. Once we reach the apex, we go back on the throttle, and this is basically as wide as we can go before we invalidate the lap, making sure that we don't touch the red and white flag. Now with all the long straights on the track, in this default setup the ride height is fairly high, which means we can place our car wherever we like on them. But it's a good practice to avoid staying in the middle of the straights for too long, because depending on your setup's ride height, it can cause the car to bottom out and lose you time. Next we have the PlayStation chicane, and our braking point is roughly halfway between the yellow railing and the 100 meter board on the left. It's also important to bring the car as far to the left as possible in order to open up the corner. Once we go hard on the brakes, we bring the car down into third gear before turning in for the apex. Now as we reach the apex, we want to bring our right side tyre right to the edge of the blue and yellow curb, but no further than that because it'll unsettle the car. Then we need to start to straighten our wheel as soon as possible, then hit the brakes again very lightly, about 20%, downshift to second gear, and then quickly turn the wheel to the left into the next apex. Now as we reach the next apex, we place our left side tyres on the blue and yellow curb. We can place the car a little further in this time, but again any more than this will unsettle the car. Then as we exit, we allow the car to drift wide to the right as we apply the throttle, and then again we aim to place our right side tyres on the blue and yellow curb. Now for the chicane, our braking point is just before the 100 meter board on the right, and again we position our car as far to the right as possible to open up the corner. Hard on the brakes, we go down into third gear, and we again want to try and place our left side tyres on the blue and yellow curb. I carried a little too much speed here and just missed it, which lost me some time. Again, once we reach the apex, we give the car a moment to settle and straighten our wheel as much as we can. Then we tap on the brakes lightly, about 20%, and downshift into second gear, then quickly turn the wheel to the right. One thing to be careful of when you exit here is there's a slight unevenness to the road near the center, which can cause the car to oversteer slightly. So it's really important that you try and get the wheel straight as soon as possible to avoid that happening. Now we move over to the left to prepare for the next corner. Next is the Mulsanne corner, and our turn-in point is this 100 meter board on the left. So we turn in slightly as we reach it, and then we want to aim the car where the curb bends up ahead. Now our braking point is just before the bend in the curb, and the key to completing this corner without locking up is to keep the wheel straight and aim the car straight ahead towards the sand trap. We go hard on the brakes down to first gear, and you'll see this section of the painted white line where it's faded, and this is where we turn in for the corner. It's really important not to be greedy and carry too much speed when turning in here, because that's going to ruin our exit speed and cost us a lot of time. So make sure you get the car slowed down enough to about 95 to 100 kilometers per hour. Now as we turn into the apex, we can place our right tire on the blue and yellow curb. Just make sure you don't touch the green and white posts here because that'll invalidate the lap. Then as we exit the corner, smoothly increase the throttle and ensure you don't place the left tires past the blue and yellow curb on the left because that'll reduce your exit speed. Same rule for this Mulsanne straight, but you'll need to cut across the track as it bends at certain parts. Just make sure you don't keep your car in the middle for too long to prevent the car from bottoming out. Now we get to the Indianapolis corner, and as we enter it, we need to get our car as far to the left as possible, which means going past the green section here. Our braking point is at the end of the green tarmac, and we carry as much speed as possible, so we only brake about 20% and downshift to 6th gear. Make sure you avoid this blue and yellow curb on the right side of the track because it'll unsettle the car. Now once we turn in, we need to get the wheel straight as soon as possible and then go hard on the brakes initially, but then start lifting off the brake gradually and use our fast downshifting to get the car into second gear and turn in for the apex on the left. It's best to avoid this blue and yellow curb because it can unsettle the car and reduce your exit speed. Then we get back on the throttle smoothly and make sure we avoid that sand trap on the right hand side. For the next corner, again we get our car as far to the left as possible, and our braking point is about halfway between these two blue Goodyear billboards on the right. Now we need to be careful with the brakes here because it's fairly easy to lock up. So we go about 80% on the brake pedal and use our fast downshifting again to help get the car slowed down to first gear. Now where we turn in here is really important, and we need to aim to get our right wheel just on the edge of the blue and yellow curb. Going further than that or onto the patch of grass will unsettle the car and reduce our exit speed. Then as we exit the corner, we need to be careful with the throttle here because it's easy to lose the rear of the car. Now we enter the Porsche curves and we need to get our car as far to the left as possible, which is about the edge of the green tarmac to the left here. Our braking point is just before the end of the green tarmac and we need to go fairly light on the brakes, about 30%, and we downshift to 6th gear and just make sure you trail brake well to make sure the car doesn't lose balance. Now it's best to avoid the blue and yellow curb on the right here because it can unsettle the car, and we go back on the throttle just after we reach the start of that curb. Once we clear that apex, we need to move the car over to the right to then open up the next part of the corner, which we take flat out. Again, try to avoid this blue and yellow curb on the left because it can unsettle the car, then go out wide right up against the wall to your right. Now our turning point here is just as we reach the Michelin sign to the left, and we turn in hard and place our car just next to the blue and yellow curb. Now our braking point for the next corner is this white line on the right, and we go on the brakes about 40% and try to hug the inside line as much as possible. It's okay to slightly touch the blue and yellow curb on the right here, but again try to refrain from doing this because it can unsettle the car. Once we straighten the wheel, our turn-in point for the next corner is this red Avis billboard on the right hand side, and there's a little trick that we need to use here. Now we lift as we enter this corner, but then as we lift and turn to the left, we give the car a quick burst of throttle before then lifting again. And what this does is prevents us from understeering out wide and allows us to get back on the throttle sooner for our exit. Now try to place the left tires on the blue and yellow curb, but try to avoid touching the yellow sausage curbs because they can send the car out wide on the exit. Same thing goes for the exit. Placing the right side tires on the blue and yellow curb is ideal, and you can use the yellow sausage curbs here, but using too much of them can cause you to invalidate the lap. Now for these two corners, try to use the blue and yellow curbs so that you don't need to turn the wheel too much. So now for the final chicanes, and our braking point is about halfway between the start of the dotted pit line and the curb ahead. As we enter the braking zone, try to make the dotted line in line with the middle of the car. Now we need to carry as much speed as we can into this chicane, and we go hard on the brakes down to 3rd gear. Now we can place our left tire on the yellow sausage curb, but be sure not to touch the white and red flag because that will invalidate the lap. Stay light on the brakes, and as we touch the apex, shift down to 2nd gear, then quickly turn the wheel to the right and line up your right tyre with the blue and yellow curb. Now for the final chicane, keep the wheel to the right to open up your entry into the chicane, and our braking point is just before the blue and yellow curb starts. Hit the brakes lightly about 20% and then turn in. Try to place your tyre just touching the edge of the yellow sausage curb. As we reach the apex, we give the car a little bit of throttle just to keep our speed up, and then turn in to line up with the final apex. Now you can place your right tyre on the red sausage curb here, but I tend to avoid it as I find it unsettles the car too much in the fixed setup. So instead I place the right tyre on the blue and yellow curb just next to it. Then once you reach the apex, go back on the throttle slightly and slowly increase it as you straighten your wheel out. Finally, try to open up your exit by placing your car as far to the left as possible so that the blue and yellow curb lines up with the middle of the car. Now that completes the lap, so let's take a look at the pit entry. So our braking point for the pit entry is just before this 3.5 board on the right, or about a car length before the pit entry curb starts on the left. Now harden the brakes initially to get down to 1st gear, then try to mount your tyre on the blue and yellow curb on the left to open up the next corner. Then turn in and place your right tyre on the next blue and yellow curb, go back on the throttle as you reach the apex and up into 2nd gear. Our next braking point is just before the big L on the left side here. Go about 50% on the brake pedal, downshift to 1st gear, and this should get you to 60 kilometers just before the white line. That was a lap at Le Mans in the BMW M Hybrid, and now we'll put it all together and leave you with the entire lap in real time. Now if you've got any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below, And if you want to see more lap guides like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel or visit lmuacademy.com.